and low income, and low income communities, we will not have the kind of segregation and inequity of race and class that still persists in cities like Baltimore, St. Louis, Chicago, DC, and beyond. Courage requires that we believe in every human being's right to access what they need to live a safe and healthy life. And this requires that we stay woke. With that, Annie will introduce Marisela, and then we will have the floor for her. Thank you.
Annie bowing in. Sorry about the recording right in the middle of your thing. I didn't know it was going to make that loud sound. My bad. So yes, I'm very excited to welcome my friend Marisela Gomez, who I had the great honor of being with this past summer in Plum Village when she received the Dharma Lamp. And Dr. Gomez is a community activist, author, public health professional, and a Dharma teacher in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, and physician scientist. She received a BS and MS from the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, a PhD, MD, and MPH from the Johns Hopkins University. Incredible. She is a mindfulness practitioner with a focus on healing justice as the way of equity work. Past and current writings address social determinants and health, social capital, and urban health, disparities in mental health care in incarcerated populations, disparities in substance use treatment, mental health care in the primary healthcare setting, community organizing and development, and mindfulness practices in organizing. And I'll put that in the chat if you want to look at that. And we are so honored. And also the founder and organizer at the Village of Love and Resistance, Volar, which hopefully Marisela will mention tonight in her talk. So thank you so much and welcome, Marisela.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you. I always enjoy presenting in a place or a forum where even when I'm talking about the organizing work and the justice work I've been doing for many years and the research, that it's actually a place where you get to bow in because unfortunately they don't usually come together. It's usually one or the other. And so that makes me very happy in preparing the PowerPoint for tonight. I was looking forward to it because of that intersection of mindfulness and justice work. And even though I have presented in the past in different venues and different practice spaces on these two, the way these two come together, it's the first time in our tradition, in Plum Village tradition, that I've been invited to do so. So yeah, it's very nice that that in our tradition there are places that are beginning to see that there is no separation between justice and love, yeah, and that in order to do something different and have different outcomes, we really want to engage with both in a meaningful way. So thank you for showing up. You could be doing many other things and you're here, so I appreciate you. And I'll be using slides. I previously thought this was longer, so I have some slides that I'll probably go through rather quickly, and so that we have some time at the end for comments and questions and discussion. So I will now share my slides. And yeah, so, oops, moves quick. All right. Sorry, I'm not sure why we jumped to this. I'm gonna try that again. It wasn't letting me advance slides. All right. So the title of what I want to share about, which is just kind of a, way to kind of guide us in a direction, so don't cling to it, is emerging from the illusion of separation, mindful resistance of uneven development in Black and Brown communities in Baltimore. This has been the bulk of my work in research and organizing in public health, is looking at how we rebuild communities that have been historically marginalized. And those communities tend to be Black and Brown. In rural areas, they look different. They may be not non-Black and Brown, non-BIPOC. And I'm not speaking in the work I'm doing around indigenous populations, although this history of gentrification and exploitation certainly affects our indigenous families. The work I've done has been in urban areas and particularly in Baltimore City. So that's the context of everything I share. And I put emerging because the emerging comes from the fact that we have merged into the illusion of separation. That this is usually where we are. And so the work and the practice is about emerging from that, right? Coming away from that. Now, the way I share information, especially around some of these difficult things in history and how we move out of this unjust history, is to share a slide of nature every 4 or 5 slides of the content of the topic. And it's my way of bringing us back to breath. So the first time, many years ago, when I started publicly speaking about gentrification and displacement, out of a project that I was involved in East Baltimore, where more than 750 Black families were displaced for Johns Hopkins to build a biotech park. What I found was I would get upset and I would get really angry as I was presenting because I was part of that movement against it. And so what I started to do was include nature slides to bring myself back to the breath, to bring myself back so that I could share from a space of openness instead of anger. And then over the years, people started reporting to me that it helped them as well to receive the information, to stay connected, to not dissociate, to not leave, because it was hard stuff. And so it's just become part of my style of teaching. And what we might say your pedagogy is to include slides of nature to bring us back, to reground and find presence. So I invite you, when you see this slide of nature, it'll just pop up. It's kind of like a mindfulness bell, you know how we do it? Like whenever it shows up, you just stop everything and breathe in and out. Well, this is going to be our mindfulness bell. All right. So I'm not sure, but for some reason, it doesn't allow me to advance beyond this slide. So I'm going to stop sharing again and see if we can. Okay. There are 3 big framing that I invite you to keep in mind as we go through this discussion tonight. Ties or Thich Nhat Hanh's peace in ourselves, peace in the world. Meaning if we can't find it in ourselves, how are we ever going to be able to bring it into the world? Another is by Dr. King, that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. And that justice is really love in calculation. Justice is love correcting that which revolts against love. And Audre Lorde, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So I want you to keep all that in mind as we move through this, the content tonight. So as I was saying, emerging from this illusion of separation, so this is a red line map of Baltimore, and many of you might know what redlining is, and actually, if there was more time, I would invite someone to say what it is, just in the interest of time. Actually, if someone wants to unmute themselves and just share And please don't take a whole lot of time. Just share what redlining is. That'd be awesome.
Hi, it's Camille. I don't really know very well, but I could give it a try, which is I think that that banks or had made some decision about you know what, I'll leave it to someone else who I think might know better, but I think it's basically neighborhoods that are seen as, okay, there's someone in the chat.
This is Cynthia. My understanding of redlining is that in order for whites to continue to keep their neighborhoods white, or governments perhaps, written into the covenants, into deeds of property would be clauses that this property could not be sold to a person of color. I mean, and so it was a way of segregating populations and keeping neighborhoods white and keeping wealth with related to property in the white community, and prime property, what was considered prime property, in the hands of the majority population, white population.
Great. So thanks both of you. Appreciate it. So what you described is actually, if we get into the terms, it's actually blockbusting. The recent real estate covenants that were used as part of maintaining segregated white communities. Redlining was actually what was initiated by the federal government and the banking institution in collaboration, where when the United States started deciding to loan money for people to purchase houses, purchase land, and offer mortgages, up till then, you had to actually have wealth, you had to have asset funds to actually purchase property. But then in the 1950s, right, 1930s actually, the government decided that we could have mortgages, we could loan money, the banks could loan money for people to purchase property, right? And so then it was, okay, who are we going to loan those monies to? And so what they did was they surveyed all the cities in the country, and they drew these maps similar to what you're seeing here. So this is a 1930s Baltimore redlining map, right? And they color coded the neighborhoods of where people lived. So in the red is where Black people lived, and sometimes new immigrants. And then it went out in the yellow was then, like, say, maybe white people, maybe low income, middle income white people. And then it went out, then there's blue, and then there's green. And green was the furthest away from the city center. And green was where it was definitely majority white and landholders and wealthy people with lots of money. And they used these maps, the bank used these maps to determine where they could lend money. And in the areas that were red, they would never lend money, right? And in those areas were where Black people lived. And so what that did was it continued this way of segregating and making sure that where Black people live, they could not own the land, right? So again, it was this continuation of wealth begetting wealth, meaning people who already had wealth were the ones that were loaned money, and those who didn't have any were never going to be able to have any in a way to purchase land. And we know what land means as far as the United States. So every city in America now, publicly, you can find your red line map of every city. So this is Baltimore's red line map. And in the last 10 years, we've been, kind of coming to Jesus in the sense of, like, the history is being, really presented as how did this country form? Why is it that we are today the way we are? And how have the United States policies brought us to this place, right? And so redlining is one of the big policy of the country that actually has shepherded us to be in these very segregated neighborhoods where we see a lot of deterioration, a lot of desolation, and then eventually becoming prime land for white wealth to continue to replicate itself by buying low and selling high, right? So what you see here is this person emerging from that, right? So if you think about it, that it requires a fragmented self to build a fragmented city or country, right? I mean, we only do outside what we already feel okay inside of us. And so that's why the peace in ourselves, peace in the world is so critical, because if we don't start to find that peace inside, there is no way we can create peace outside. And that's kind of what this emerging is, right? It's currently we have merged into the illusion that because of our own separate selves, right? A separate self from another, that we build countries and cities that are feels okay separating people from each other. We're just doing what we already embody, and that really this illusion of separation, of a separate self, this is one that we have to emerge from, this illusion, because until we do so, we will continue to build countries and cities that will always be separate and segregated. Okay, I think I see the trick is if I stay too long on a slide, it doesn't allow me to advance it. It makes me have to go in and out again. Okay, so what we want to then do, right, if we're going to emerge from this illusion of separation and build separate communities, is change how we do this. So we have to trace the history, right, and then we have to act, right. We have to correct the injustice that's occurred, and we have to build the just ones, right, build the just places and spaces, and as I said, cultivate that self. So this is a quote from Bhikkhu Bodhi. Why do we investigate history, which repeats itself? So he says, instead of turning away from the unwanted, corrupt thought, word, or action, one confronts it directly as an object, scrutinizes its features, and investigates its source. When this is done, the thought, the word, or action quiets down and eventually disappears. For an unwholesome thought is like a thief. It only creates trouble when its operation is concealed, but put under observation, it becomes tame. And so that's why we must look at the history and reveal it for what it is, not so much to penalize or shame or hold people up to blame or anything like that. It is so that we don't keep concealing this path of injustice, so we can reveal a path of justice, right? So it's twofold. So this is a timeline that isn't complete. Unfortunately, the United States racialized structures and systems that have explicitly and implicitly exploited people and land is long and vast. And this is a very abbreviated one to give us a context that this is not just about urban cities. This is about a whole, it's really, 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 really important for us to get that we are inculcated in a whole system that has the United States structures has actually built the segregated communities that we live in, right? It's not just one person or one rich group or one company. It's a policy of the United States government over and over again in collaboration with elite wealth that has actually determined how we will build communities and cities. And then therefore, the devastation that we have in communities that lead to the kind of killing of someone like Tyron Nichols this last week, right? George Floyd, right, in 2020. We have orchestrated, structured communities that will inevitably and always result in this kind of violence until we reveal it, until we uncover it, until we do something different. So you see, so it's why it's important to really understand that we live in a country that has initiated, contained, and maintained these kinds of structures. The circled ones are the ones that pertain more to what I'm talking about, which is in urban city areas where the kind of redevelopment has occurred that results in cities like Baltimore that I'll talk more about, right? So the Jim Crow period, the redlining that I talked about in the 1930s, urban renewal, not a government policy, that allowed for continued segregation and money being put specifically for white communities and not in Black communities. And then in the 2000s, where we're looking now at gentrification, which is just happening everywhere, in every city. In DC, you know, it used to be Chocolate City, now it's Cafe LA City. Um, and it's continuing to change. I did it again. Not sure what the time limit is on these. I have to say I don't know if it's, well, I was gonna say, I don't know if it's easier for someone else to share, but let's try. Okay, so let's take a breath in and out. So here is an example of Jim Crow laws and covenants. And of course, for you familiar with the history, Jim Crow affected every sector of society, right? It was the legal and illegal way to basically continue the Civil War, even though the Civil War had ended. But I call your attention to the real estate sector and how Jim Crow affected it. So 32 states adopted, quote, model real estate licensing acts that authorized state commissions to revoke the license of agents who violated the National Association of Real Estate Code of Ethics, which forbid realtors from introducing members of any race or nationality into neighborhoods where their presence will clearly be detrimental to property values. Right? So this was immediately after the Civil War ended. And so what we had was this continuation, right? This was the National Association of Real Estate. This was their code of ethics. This is what they had to follow in order to be able to do their work and to get licensure, right? They had to make sure they never introduce the folks that would bring value down into the neighborhood. And we knew what that meant. Now, Baltimore City was particularly terrible in redline in Jim Crow. In fact, it was the city that other cities came to study to learn how to better maintain segregation of white neighborhoods, right? Our city council passed laws that really made sure that Black neighbors were never introduced. Block busting happened during redlining area and during the Jim Crow era. Real estate companies would hire Black people, pay them to be driving around in a car in a white neighborhood to scare white people into selling low so that they could make money in reselling high. All these tactics they use to scare white people in order to leave a neighborhood when they were ready to turn that neighborhood over. So there's like this whole history of the way that we actually created neighborhoods and continued this segregation, even using Black people in the detriment of their own selves, right? So redlining in the 1930s, right? We continue on, think of that timeline, continued in the segregation. And this map, you can see a little bit more clearly the way it's segregated. And then 1950s and 60s is urban renewal. And urban renewal was when the city or the country, the US government, again, US government, right? Said, oh, look at these deteriorated Black neighborhoods in our inner cities. How did they ever come to be like that? These people, they're so dirty. Meanwhile, they've completely under-resourced neighborhoods. They don't allow money for indoor plumbing. Only the white neighborhoods have indoor plumbing. They allow the Black neighborhoods to have only outdoor plumbing, and everything's segregated. No funds for schools, no funds for fire stations. So when a house caught fire, would burn down. And so then you'd have people living in these burnt out houses. So this whole system of devastation and deterioration continued. And so then in the 1950s, the government said, oh my gosh, look how these Black people live. Isn't it just terrible? It's so unsanitized. Let us put money in this urban renewal program to redevelop these areas. So what did they do? So they brought all this money, government money, into these neighborhoods, and they said, we're going to redevelop it. But what did they do? All they did was they displaced the people who were living there, and they rebuilt it. And the people who then were brought in to live was a different race and class of people, right? So what they did was they pushed the people there into even more segregated poverty, and they rebuilt those areas. And this is everywhere. This wasn't just Baltimore City. This is just a map of Baltimore City urban renewal areas. And again, in the last 10 years, these maps are now available from the different cities, so we can start to understand better how we arrived where we are today. So basically, what we've done is built separate and unequal societies, right? Created by, as I've said, the people in power, the government, that distributed resources into every sector of society. It wasn't just housing, it was health, it was recreation, it was transportation, it was schooling, every single sector. Because remember, every sector makes up a community, right? A city. So every sector was controlled and determined by the policies of the government. And that was determined by the funding. And so this systematic under-resourcing of Black neighborhoods and a systematic over-resourcing of white neighborhoods that has resulted in where we are today. So it's been an intentional creation. And so now we're living that result, right, today, but nobody wants to look at the history of how we got here. Now, when we continue to do this, this is work of Mindy Fulilove, where as we have done this continuous basic devastation of how we build communities and continued displacement, right? We've gone from pre-urban renewal era, which is 1950s, where Black families so after urban renewal, after redlining, where Black people were concentrated, what you had is everybody living together. So the doctors lived next to the person that's shine shoe at the train station, next to the lawyer, next to the school teacher, so everybody was concentrated in the same neighborhoods. And there was a way that people lived together very, very differently, right? So if you talk to elders, like I've been doing for the last 30 odd years in Baltimore City, people talk about, oh yeah, I used to leave my door open at night, never a problem. People looked out for each other. You hear the story about, the kid comes from school and they did something wrong that day. And by the time they got to their house, they got maybe 5 scoldings, if just that, right? Because it was a community that was contained, and people knew each other and looked after each other. With urban renewal, the displacement started, right? So this rebuilding of communities, what happened is people were displaced, what Mindy Fulilove calls serial forced displacement. And each one of these urban renewal, urban renewal, deindustrialization, planned shrinkage, then gentrification had an effect on the community, because each one of them resulted in displacement of enlarged population, right? It's kind of that generational trauma that we're talking about. We have different words for it. Mindy Fulilove calls, and you'll see a slide after this, she calls it root shock, right? She's been doing research on urban renewal and effects on communities. This is a traumatic response to losing all or part of your ecosystem. Like when you uproot a plant and you replant it, sometimes it doesn't take, right? Sometimes it dies, sometimes it grows very differently, never quite recovers. The weathering effect, Geronimus, she talks about this repeated exposure to these adversities, the political marginalization, the racism, this perpetual discrimination for people who have multiple intersections of discrimination, race, class, gender, abilities, etc., language, these different ways that people are identifying, that this continued, it weathers you down, like a piece of leather in the sun, it weathers it, right? And more recently, the term trauma or historical multi-generational trauma, as we use, again, this kind of trauma that is affecting whole communities of people, right? The specific cultural, racial, ethnic group. This is Coleman's work that started us down this discussion. And even earlier, Fred spoke about in Boston when there was major displacement of communities, again, making room, gentrification, making room for, whatever, bigger development, universities developing themselves out, that there was a psychological trauma. He did a whole set of interviews on the people who were displaced, listening to them. What happened to you? How do you feel? People were depressed. They had a hard time recovering. So this whole development and the displacement, it leads to dis-ease, right, in our bodies and our minds. And what we understand the causal pathway to be, meaning what is the similar thing that's going on that's affecting everyone, and it's stress, right? It's long-term stress. So just to come back to this, the fact that we continuously go through this cycle, the industrialization, right, as people lost jobs, factories closed down, a lot of the factory jobs, especially in cities like Baltimore, but all through the Rust Belt in the United States, those lower paid jobs were held by Black people and brown people. And so you saw people losing their jobs, and they became destabilized, and they were then removed through displacement as their neighborhoods changed. And planned shrinkage, some of you may know, especially folks in New York, this is where the government, when they're trying to replace and displace people because they want that area, they close down, say, the fire station. So when there's a fire, there's no response to the fire because there's no nearby fire station, and the house or 2 or 3 burns down, and then the neighborhood goes into more decay, and so then you can get the property for cheap. You see, so there's, and this is all real. This is all research. This isn't just, oh, you think this happened. No, this is what I keep trying to say. Government sanctioned ways of continued segregation and wealth building in certain communities. And then, of course, gentrification, all leading from communities of care, communities of high social capital, meaning where we take care of each other, we look out for our neighbors, we care when something happens, to communities of confusion, and then communities of disorder. And right now, what we call in some communities, like in Baltimore, parts of Baltimore City, what we call nonsense communities, where it's just a collection of people living together. We don't have these ties anymore. We don't have these bonds anymore. We don't have social capital anymore. Okay, I think we need one of these. So what I want to do is paint a picture for you of how communities that I just described that have become marginalized, how they become like that. Like, what does Maricela mean when she's saying, oh, it becomes this way? I'm going to paint a picture for you from a population level. So I want to just remind you of the 1930s red line map of Baltimore City. So this is a red line area. And then I want to show you currently what we call the black butterfly and the white L in Baltimore City. See, we're so segregated that we actually can demarcate. The darker area is the area where the majority of Black people live. And we see some of this, like 97% of the Black population is in the black butterfly, if you imagine the wings. And then the middle line, what we call the white L, comes out like this, right? So this is where a majority of white people live. You'll find 97, 98% of white people in these neighborhoods, no Black folk. And so the research also shows that anywhere between 60 to 80% of neighborhoods that were redlined in the 30s are still suffering from the effect of that marginalization. What does that mean? They're still under-resourced. They still are communities like East Baltimore, where we have majority populations that are poor, and that the systems are under-resourced, means recreation, housing, education, transportation, etc. And so I want to show you, we're going to go through different points of growth of a family or of a community, right? So this is, the little arrow is going to keep us. So this is where I'm doing most of my work now, in the Old Town area. And Middle East area is where I've been doing work in the last 30 years. And so this is the percent of births where the mother received early prenatal care, which is a good thing, right? We need first trimester care to make sure the trajectory of birth and actually health throughout the lifespan continues. So you can see that the majority is darker here, right? It's a darker shade color, that the highest percentage of receiving appropriate first trimester care occurs in the white L, right? So this is why you can just look at a map. It's easy on the population level to see this trajectory. So, okay, prenatal, already we're under-resourced in our Black communities. Look at the black butterfly, right? So our white neighborhoods, we get good prenatal care. Our Black neighborhoods, not so great, right? This thing does not like to, okay. So now a person's born into these neighborhoods, what's the expected lifespan? So we call that the life expectancy, right? How many years can you expect to live? So I want you to look at the black butterfly. So here, this is where you can expect to live 65 to 68 years old, right? But in the white L, more or less, right, you can expect to live longer, up to 85. So you can see up to, at times, between 65 to 85, a 20-year life expectancy, depending on your zip code, right? So about 5-6 years ago, when we started noticing this, we started talking about the zip code you're born in determines how long you get to live. And that's really messed up, right? Like we shouldn't be able to do that, categorize like that. Okay, so now we come into the mortality. So when between dying from at the age of 25 to 44, where do we see that happening, right? So the highest rate of death between the ages of 25 and 44 happens in the black butterfly, right? 45 to 58% of the population, right? You're talking about half the population, right? Can expect mortality between ages 25 and 44. Whereas in the white L, you don't see that kind of expectation of death at such an early age. All righty. Okay, so on the right, what we see, oopsie. On the right, what we see here is a percent of the population age 25 plus with less than a high school diploma. So less than a high school diploma or GED. Okay, so where is that showing up? That is showing up at the highest percentage in the black butterfly, right? The darker shade, right? So you see the trajectory, right? Prenatal, life expectancy, right? As we continue through this trajectory, now the kids have grown, now they're going to school. Well, what percentage as a population are finishing high school, getting a GED, right? So in the black butterfly, you can expect 26 to 33%. That's 1 out of 3. Now, if you have a population where 1 out of 3 of the people are not finishing high school, it tells you the kind of population we're building, doesn't it? Right? Okay. Then let's look at, on the right, the percent population with a bachelor's degree, right? 25 and older. Where's the highest percentage? That's in the white L, right? So in the white L, you see up to 82% of the population having a bachelor's degree, while if you look at the black butterfly, you see we're not having that high percentage. We can look from anywhere from 5% having a bachelor's degree to 23% if we're lucky in the black butterfly areas, right? So we're building out this community, right? This is a good time to have some tea. And so then it goes on. So you don't get an education. And so how are you going to get employed? What's your money? Okay. So the left side on the left is the percent of the population 16 to 64 who are employed. Okay. Where do we see our highest employment? In the white L. Where do we see our lowest employment? Right? In the black butterfly, where 1 out of 2, right? Up to 51%, 1 out of 2 people are not employed between these ages, right? On the right, percent of households earning less than 25,000. Where is that happening? Where's the highest concentration of that? Well, if this, we see 50 up to 57%, 1 out of 2 people are earning less than $25,000. Okay. So we continue, right? Don't finish school, don't have a bachelor's degree, don't have a GED or high school, earning little wage if you're employed, right? And then earning little wage if you're employed at all, right? 1 out of 2 people could be not employed, right? So we see how it continues. And so then we wonder, well, why is there all this violence, right? Why is there all these shootings, right? Because we only see that in the TV, run a black face or a brown face, and and they're the ones arrested. Well, if you look at the trajectory of that we're looking here at this population level, we can see why, and it bears out true, right? Where's the number of shooting calls for service per 1,000 residents? So where the number highest? In the black butterfly, right? So we're not pathologizing people living in the black butterfly. I'm hoping that that's not what you leave here with tonight. I hope what I'm trying to do is share, and that we have a deeper understanding of why the things are the way they are, right? So, and then the number of adult arrests, well, it just continues on, right? So where's the highest number of adult arrests? Well, it's in the black butterfly again, right? Less in the white L. So we like to say, oh, these white populations, they're so nice and everything. They have all these things. Nobody's going to jail, et cetera, et cetera. And then we like to pathologize our black communities. And yet we don't want to look at how come it's like that, right? And that's our practice, is to look deeply in every moment why something is the way it is. What is the root cause, right? The investigation, looking deeply. And these last two is to just continue it as far as vacant and abandoned houses. Let's look at this right graph here, and you see where is the highest percentage of vacant and abandoned houses? In the black butterfly, right? And why is that? Remember, if you don't finish school and you don't get an education and there's underemployment, right? And the wages are low, are you going to be able to own your property? And if you do, when you have things like the foreclosure crisis, things go south very quickly, or they go bad very quickly. Sorry, I shouldn't say south, because we are the global south majority, aren't we? And I want to show you this slide on the left. This speaks to what is happening as far as gentrification. And so here, where you see that the landowners, the property owners, are not letting people with housing vouchers. City area has become the cool place for professional class people to show up and live. People want to walk to their cafes, they want to, go to the gym, the yoga studio, etc. All things I like to do also, by the way. And so what's happening is, in order to allow people to come back into this area, housing vouchers, which is supplemental vouchers for people with a certain income, are not being accepted in this inner core. And so what we're going to see in the next 5 or 10 years is a complete different way that these maps will show up, because this area is going to become white again and professional class again, because now white people want it. Before they fled it, but now they want it. And so who has the power, who have the money, will get it. Yeah. So I like this, well, I don't like it. but I like the message, and it speaks for me to what Ty says. I'm like this because you're like that. Yeah. So I'm going to close here soon because I've shown you the history. And I don't have time to speak more about the way we move out of this, and so maybe that'll come in some of the questions. But the remaining slides are really to talk about that, particular about Valar, Village of Love and Resistance, and how we're acting out from this history to change it. But what we do understand is that fragmented communities have little power, and those are the kinds of communities that are the history of this, of what I just spoke about. And that until we start to reconnect these bonds and to heal, we won't be able to really rebuild our structures and our communities in any way that's beneficial to those living there. And that also means the people in the communities making decisions, not people coming in thinking they know how to save a community. It really has to be in partnership. Every especially people who have lived through the crime and grime, as we say. These are the people who need to be involved in how we do change our communities. So I'm going to move through this and just close with this one slide that I find to be very beautiful. Well, there's many beautiful ones, but it's this one. And this, I just took this actually 2 days ago. So what you see here is the sun, and then you see this reflection in the water. And I didn't upload the other one, but if someone was to just, and you see this reflection, right? It's a very clear, there's no waves in the water. You see the reflection of the pier and the pier out here. But if someone only looked at, if someone didn't see the sun, if they only looked, because that's what I found myself actually at one point, was I was staring at the water and I only saw the reflection here. And this illusion of separation, this is what came to mind for me, was we think we're separate. So someone might think that there's a sun up here and a sun here in the water. So it's the illusion, right? Someone may think that there's a pier here, some weird upside down pier there, here, and one here. And so this idea that we're not together, we're not one, and how we've lived that out. So when I look at this, I thought, this is what we do. We see two sunshines, we see two suns, and we think there really is two, and really, it's just one. And when we start to see each other, the reflection of each other, that's when we emerge, is from this illusion. And until we are able to do that, I think we're really stuck. So I close with this because I really invite us to emerge. And next time you see these reflections, think about how everyone is a reflection. The person living in community is nothing like us. People in Turkey right now, they are also a reflection. Abroad or right home, that this is where I think we're headed and need to head. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Maricela, for this beautiful presentation and the breathing. Appreciate that a lot. So we have a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask? Adriana, do you want to also say what you just were thinking?
Yes, sure. I don't know, Maricela, sorry for asking this to you here, and free to answer whatever you feel, but we can set up maybe another session for next month to continue with this, because the second part your presentation. I think it's the most important part, not the most important part, but it's what we really need to hear, the solutions and how can we participate in everything. So I don't know if you agree, maybe we can later come with a date, but maybe I think it's a good idea to have a second session.
Yes, I agree actually, because it is the emergence. And what I cannot do in good faith and ethic is to pretend that we can merge into it, into the disillusion, and emerge from it without talking about how we got here, because that's usually what we miss. We want to jump, and we're like, oh, why do we need to have BIPOC group? Let's all just sit together because we all love each other, and we know that without taking care and looking at the difficult history, there is no way we can move into mending it. What are we mending? We think nothing's there. So I apologize that we only got to this part, but I would be doing a disservice to my heart and to you if I just jumped and say, let's just like emerge and just be happy together.
Absolutely. No, and we completely agree about that. So that's why we are asking this. And I think also we will have more time to reflect on this, that it's really important, and maybe even share more resources about what we just saw. So next session, we will have a little more context about how we got here. But please, we can later continue with this and set up the date. We will go with, there are some questions, I think, Annie. Thank you, Marisela.
It looks like, thank you. It looks like there's a question about, does Volar interrupt gentrification? And maybe you can just speak to a little bit about what Volar does. That could be maybe our final thing. There are some more questions, but are mostly comments. So Annie bowing out.
Thank you. Yes, Volar is about, so Volar means Village of Love and Resistance. And our mission is to co-create community led by Black and Brown people affected by this history, and to rebuild through healing, through power, and through land. And we're moving to this word. We used to say land reclamation. Now we're talking about land partnership, because the reclamation is still this kind of ownership of land, when really we should be in partnership with land. Even stewardship is actually a little bit still hierarchical, right? But partnership with land, it really offers a respect that we start to share with land the resources that they have and the resources that we have, right? So that's who Volar is. And yes, as you could see, the remainder of all the slides was about Volar and the way we show up. And we are about interrupting gentrification from a place of healing, because it's about what I'm saying. It's about the peace inside. And if we're not healed people, we're likely to cause harm, right? We're likely to call everybody the enemy, and not see that the enemy is greed and hatred and delusion, right? And so that's nice in a practice spiritual space, and it's also nice and real in the public space of justice work. And that's why they're not separate. They're really not separate, because if we're going to really do the work of healing and stopping this injustice of land and the way we do uneven development, it requires us to really heal the trauma from the uneven development. We have to, so we do community wellness days where we do air acupuncture and we do yoga and we do breathing, because we realize that that's necessary. Yeah.
Thank you. And maybe we could take one question from Karen and then wrap up, perhaps. Karen, did you want to go?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Marcella. Thinking ahead, I'm just wondering if there are some resources that you could point us to in preparation for our time together the next time, when we are going to figure out what we're to do with this reality and history.
Thank you, Karen. One thing is that we have a space on the Making Visible page where we can put resources for this topic. And if we get other ones from Maricela, we can put them there. Annie bowing out.
And there are some resources already there if you go now, but we will have more if Maricela send us more. Thank you.
Yeah, Marisol bowing in, and I put the chat in the chat, our website. And then I also want to say that several people in here I see tonight have already been supporting Valar in meaningful ways with different kinds of resources. And that's really wonderful, because I think that's the wisdom of seeing that our practice is not separate from our work, our activism work and our justice work. So I think the preparation is maybe as well other folks who are here to say why you support Valar and why you think the work of Valar is important. And so it really is a collective conversation, because we all have something to share, right? We all do it in our way, right? You know, the mindfulness practice says, am I aware of what I'm thinking in this moment, right? So if I'm thinking something that is trying to penalize the uneven developers from the 1930s who came about with this redlining plan, it's not going to work. I mean, yeah, I guess we could punish all the people who led this whole history, and yet it's my thought in that moment. Am I trying to penalize them, or is my thought about, may they find true happiness so they don't keep doing the nonsense that they're doing, and their kids don't keep doing the nonsense that they're doing, and they don't continue with these big trust funds that continue to gentrify communities and build their wealth, their double-digit and triple-digit profit off the backs of Black and brown people, right? So we want to wish them well. We want to wish them through happiness. We want to wish them like wisdom and enlightenment so they quit messing around with folk, right? And it's that simple. It's that simple. So we all have something. Even if I just sit on my cushion and wish every rich person who is exploiting people well, that they may wake up to that. I am doing something to shift what's going on. Because it's not going to be just the law and the policies that change these kind of uneven development processes. It's going to be people's hearts and minds. And then we go from there into like maybe what's more active, or maybe some of the work that I'm doing and others are doing. So I think we all have each one of you, and I really want you to think about this if you're going to come back to the next session. Like, what are you going to do? I mean, I can tell you what Valar's doing. I can tell you what I've been doing, but that's just me. What are you all going to do? What are we going to do together? Right? It's the same thing I was saying at the very top of this, is we keep saying we want something different, but we keep acting the same. And then we want to see something different. And that's what we call crazy making in psychiatry and psychology. So if we want to keep doing crazy making, then yeah, talk nice and do the same thing that we've been doing and expect something different. So my invitation to you is to think deep and hard, is how are you going to, Tai says, when you see something that needs to be done, seeing is, what are you seeing for? If you see, you got to act. So how are we going to act together collectively? And it could look very different, and it could look very similar. So I put it back on you, to figure it out with me so we can do it together. Thank you.
Dear friends, are we ready for the final bell? Adriana, Maricela? Yes. Okay, we'll have a final bell. So from this evening together, may we have taken in something that can change our hearts and our actions, and may our practice together flow out into the world in ways small and large that can heal that separation and bring peace and ease and justice and freedom to every single being.